Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason De La Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. My friends, we have made it to the very end. The last week of the high school football season is over, and we have a state champion to talk about after the Gunter Tigers captured their third championship since 2016. The Class 3A Division II title with a 42-7 win over Poth. We will recap that and take a look back at the season as a whole here in Texoma and what it might mean for the future. But of course, we have to talk about the game last Thursday at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. That 42-7 win that was probably not as close as the score would even look, because we'll get the Poth scoring out of the way because there was only the one touchdown, and it came with 16 seconds left on a 30-yard touchdown pass. That close again for this Gunter defense to get a shutout. They were right there. It was the third time in the playoffs they've had somebody score in the closing seconds to avoid a shutout. So that's probably the worst thing that we can say about what happened last week was Gunter didn't get a shutout, and that the Pirates scored with 16 seconds left to make that happen. That was probably the absolute worst thing of the day. Outside of that, everything came up Gunter. Basically leading wire to wire. They score with a little over 4 minutes to go in the first quarter, and it's 21-0 at halftime, and they're never really threatened. And we have seen this in all three of the state championships that Gunter has won. Back in 2016 against Bowling, back in 2019 against Paul Pewitt, and in this one against Poth. Gunter has shown to be by far the best team in 3A Division II, and the outcome never in doubt in all three of their games. They've scored in the 40s every time. They've held two of the three opponents to just a touchdown. They've really put out some very impressive performances with everything on the line to get this third championship. And as a whole, just to continue what has happened in the last 7 seasons. I talk about it a lot. It's thrown out there all the time when we talk about what this program has become, because it is so amazing. 2016 you win a championship. 2017 you're the runner-up. 2018 you're a state semifinalist. 2019 you win a championship. 2020 you're a state semifinalist. 2021 you're the state runner-up. And then this year you win a championship. So in the 7 seasons, you've got 3 titles. And then we're talking in 17 and 21, you lose to the state champion in the championship game. And in 2020, you lost to the eventual champion in Canadian. So in 6 of the 7 seasons, you lost to the team that won it, or you won it yourself. And that just says a lot about this team. They've won a lot of games. They've won, I think it's 103 games in the last 7 years. I put out there, just as a comparison on Twitter, who's had a better 7-year run since 2016. And there's only a couple. And they're the people that you would expect. People threw out Aledo. People threw out Carthage. Carthage has won 5 championships in the last 7 years, so that's obviously better than what Gunter's done. But there is a very short list that Gunter is on in this run where people would trade anything to have that 7-year stretch compared to what they did in the last 7 years. And a lot of those are at the 5A and the 6A level. Some of those schools that have they can say they have multiple titles, or went undefeated for 2.5 seasons, almost 3 seasons. They won 2 championships and then had a runner-up finish or made the state semifinals before losing. There's very few teams that can do what Gunter's doing. So It's just amazing that it just year after year we see these kids go out there. This is another undefeated season at 15-0. The second one that they've had to go with the first championship, and the only reason they don't have that extra win is because nobody wanted to play them, because they've been so good that they had multiple opponents cancel the first week and they couldn't find a replacement, and they were number one all year long. Had 3 close games out of the 15 the whole way through. If Brock had won against Franklin, losing on a field goal at the buzzer in the Division I championship game, Gunter wouldn't have been able to stake its claim to a mythical "we're the best team in 3A" regardless of division, because they went to Brock and won, and that was one of their close games. But you talk about, they had that game against Brock 21-16. They beat Bells 24-14, and obviously the game against Canadian a couple weeks ago, 21-20, to come back and win that game. Those are their only games that are close. When you sit here and you throw out, some of these scores, 67-6, 41-0, 59-7, 54-21. I'll point out that 21, the highest point total allowed against Gunter, came against Howe in district play, 54-21. And then from that stretch, from that game in the middle of October until winning the state championship, they went 85-0, 56-0, 49-0, a forfeit win against the team that they beat 67-6 to open their season, and then 48-7, which should have been a shutout, Jacksboro scored in the final seconds. 40-6 against Palmer, should have been a shutout, scored in the final minute. 31-7 against Holiday, and then of course 21-20 against Canadian before winning 42-7 against Poth. Just dominating performances, basically for the last 2 months, except for the win over Canadian. And I'm going to tell you what, that might have been obviously the most impressive win, because Canadian, I think a lot of people said, and a lot of people did say before that game, and it has shown, we've now seen it 4 of the last 7 years. The winner of Gunter Canadian has won the state championship, and if Canadian would have won, they were going to beat Poth. Everybody knew that semifinal again, the winner was going to win the state championship, and Canadian came that close to being able to do that. And so to win that game, I think might be the most impressive thing. That and the Brock game, because I think when we look back on that Brock game and you look at the numbers and you see how that happened, that's equally as impressive to be able to beat the 3A, the eventual 3A Division I runner-up. But Gunter was number 1 the whole year in the rankings. They lived up to that hype. I assume they're going to be number 1 in the rankings next year, and they will have earned that right until somebody potentially beats them. It's just been amazing to see how they've done it. From year 1 of this to the latest year. And the latest year, the blueprint kind of follows itself. The defense has always been phenomenal throughout this whole run. It's been the one constant that you can really look at, because you look at the offensive side, and they've had 5 different quarterbacks in the 7 years. And this year you had a new guy behind center. They've had guys graduate and they roll in new guys that are leading rushers, or this new guy's the main receiver, or and obviously they replace guys on defense, but the defense there's never really an up or down. There's never really a variance to the overall production of the unit, and you saw that in this game, and that's why I want to start there instead of talking about the offensive numbers, because much like the Holiday game, when we talked about that, where when you got a couple drives in and Gunter got up, in this game they got up 7-0, and it was 21-0 at halftime. Basically, everybody, the talk was this game's over. Poth had shown next to nothing in terms of any offense that made you think that they were going to score at all, let alone score enough to come back from being down 21-0 at halftime. They had two long pass plays, and this is a team that does not normally pass. And I think one of them for sure they caught Gunter in the they made the better call, and they made the right call at the right time, and they got a throw over the middle to the running back leaking out of the backfield, and that went for 31 yards. And then there was another play late in the second quarter, where they threw it deep along the sideline to the running back, same guy, Matthew Bunn, and he caught it for 41 yards to get into Gunter territory. And outside of that, outside of those two plays, Poth didn't do anything. You look at the halftime stats. They had 3 first downs, and 2 of them came on those plays. So outside of those 2 plays, they only had 1 first down the rest of the first half. They had 17 carries for 29 yards. They had 78 passing yards, but again, 74 of those yards came on. So 70 of those yards came on 2 plays. The other 2 passes, one went for 2 yards and one went for 6 yards. So if you take out those 2 big pass plays and you look at the other 19 plays that gained yardage, they had 19 plays gain 36 yards. So not even 2 yards a carry or 2 yards a play. That's how dominant Gunter's defense was to open this game. And they didn't do it. They didn't really do it on turnovers. They did get 1 turnover in the first half. They got 1 in each half. Colin Peacock comes up with an interception after the long pass play to Bunn to get into Gunter territory about the 40-yard line. They try to go deep again with a throw. It's short, and Peacock picks it off at the 9-yard line. And that was the best drive that Poth had, and it ended in an interception. But it wasn't like Poth had 5 turnovers and they just couldn't, or penalties to back them up and put them in bad situations. Gunter was the more physical team. They were obviously the more athletic team. Try to run outside on them, and they just could not gain the edge at all. And we've seen this with Gunter and teams that are run-minded teams. Lubbock Roosevelt last year in the state semifinals. Paul Pewitt in that final in 2019. If you are not able to run, if you are not able to pass against Gunter, it's very hard to move the ball against them. Franklin last year was an exception, and they proved that because it has been being the exception because they've won 30-something games in a row, and they went and won the Division I championship this year with a lot of the same kids that they beat Gunter with last year. So it's not a fact, but you've got to be able to be like a Canadian with a quarterback who is mobile but also can throw, can make some big plays in the passing game on a consistent basis. If you can't do that, you're in trouble. And once those teams get behind against Gunter, it's really hard for them to come back because they're not really looking at big plays, doing things in the air. They want they want to keep it on the ground, and that's what Gunter wants because you're gonna grind out drives. Time's gonna slip away, and you're gonna look up and go, okay, well this game's almost over, and you haven't scored any points or anything like that. So 21-0 at halftime, and that at that point it was almost over. And then Poth got the ball to start the second half. They didn't score, and then Gunter put together a drive and scored to make it 28-0, and then that was basically really over. So we'll talk about the offense in a whole situation to talk about how they built up that lead, and in the end it was a semi-balanced attack. It was more based on the ground, and that definitely opened some things up in the passing game. 297 yards on the ground on 46 carries. That's 6.5 yards a carry. And the combo of Walker Overman and Luke Dodd, they go a total of 14 of 21 passing for 163 yards. It just balanced all the way through. That's the other thing about Gunter. When you look at some of these teams and you say, okay, we've got to stop this guy and we've got to stop this guy. Like when you looked at Poth and you looked at the stats and you looked at all that sort of stuff, you say, hey, their quarterback, they like to run their quarterback a lot. We've got to stop him. And their running back is really good. They combined, they scored over 60 touchdowns the year. We know we've got to stop those two guys. When you look at Gunter and you look at stats or you look at games, it's hard to say, well, we've got to take away. This is the guy we've got to take away if we're going to beat Gunter. Because I know they only played 14 games on the field because of their schedule and the forfeit and all that stuff. But Gunter did not have a 1,000-yard rusher. Gunter did not have a 900-yard rusher. Gunter had an 800-yard rusher and a 700-yard rusher as their two leading rushers, Ethan Sloan and Ivy Hellman. And when you average that out per game, even though they played two less games than they possibly could have, it's only like 60-something yards a game. I mean, you talk about them going up against these opponents where these guys have 1,500 yards, 1,800 yards. They've scored, 30-something touchdowns by one kid by themselves. Gunter doesn't have that, and they really haven't had that during this run. They've been able to spread out a lot of that. Occasionally, they have a guy who is in that, who goes over 1,000 or over 1,500 and is a little bit in front. But it's not like if we stop this guy, who do you stop? Do you stop Ethan Sloan? Do you try to take him away? But then you have Ashton Bennett and Ivy Hellman and Walker Overman as a runner, and it's really hard to stop what Gunter does offensively, because when you watch them on film, depending on what game you watch, it's a different guy in that game that will do something. And so, like in this game, Ashton Bennett, 13 carries, 87 yards, 2 touchdowns. Ethan Sloan, 8 carries, 62 yards, 1 touchdown. Ivy Hellman, 7 carries, 58 yards, 2 touchdowns. Walker Overman, 7 carries, 52 yards on the ground. So that's 4 guys who each got at least 7 carries, and each of them averaged 6.7, 7.8, 8.3, and 7.4 yards per game. And then you throw in a guy like Braden Hinton, who gets 4 carries for 17 yards mixed in there, and he's getting 4 yards a pop. And it's just really hard to key on one aspect of this Gunter rushing attack because they're so balanced. And then you talk about the passing game. Well, if you're hitting 75% of your passes, it's hard to focus on that. And in this game, Cannon Lemberg was the main guy, 6 catches for 94 yards. But Sloan has 3 catches for 19 yards. Hellman has 2 for 14. And so it's spread out to where it's hard to mess with. It's hard to mess with what Gunter does and try to take something away without opening up something for somebody else. And that's the beauty of how good they've been offensively to do what they've done to during this run. And I will point out too, because we did mention it as we got later in the season, Gunter went the whole season without an interception. They did not throw an interception. Now they not to say that they threw a ton, because that's not their offense. But I don't, if you're throwing a decent amount of the time and you're not giving away the ball, period, while you have a defense that's so good that it's getting plenty of turnovers, especially in the way of interceptions, because teams have to throw against you because they get behind. You're still talking about a good number of attempts. We're talking about 200, a little over 200 throws. To not have an interception in 200 throws is phenomenal, and it's just another thing that, I mean, like I said, it's just so hard to deal with, and so that's what you saw Poth dealing with, and honestly, early on it looked like, okay, maybe they might actually be able to this could be a battle of defenses. It may be a low scoring type of game, but it got away from them like we said, in the second quarter, because the first quarter, they both wins the toss, so they get their choice. They want the ball second half, which, I think that's always to me that's the right call. I think everybody, if you win the toss, you should defer to the second half. But that's just me. That's my philosophy. That would be my philosophy. And a lot of coaches agree with me on that. So Gunter get the ball first. And they went 3 and out. And you're like, okay, that's interesting. And then Poth gets a first down. But then has to punt. So those 2 drives alone took up about 10 minutes. And you're like, okay, or no, it took up about 5 minutes. And so you're like, okay, both teams, went out there, did their script, didn't really get a whole lot. Maybe this has a chance to be, a sort of a defensive battle, much like, Canadian Gunter was the week before. And then Gunter gets the ball at their 33, 12-play drive, 3.5 minutes, and Ashton Bennett scores 12-yard touchdown run, 7-0 Gunter. And we're off because after that, Poth really didn't put together anything. They go 3 and out. Then Gunter goes 3 and out. So maybe you're like, okay, we got maybe a little, still maybe a defensive battle. It's 7-0 at the end of the first quarter. Poth's got the ball. They're maybe about to put something together. They had one of those big pass plays to where it looked like they were gonna put something together in Gunter territory. But Gunter's able to hold them once they get past midfield, and I don't want to say interestingly or not, depending on how aggressive you want to be. They punt at the Gunter 41-yard line, and it's a touchback, so Gunter's going to start at their 20. They are not able to do anything with that. They pick up a couple first downs, but then they ultimately have to punt. And this is another one of the aspects of this Gunter team. Coach Frizzell mentioned it after the game because it comes into play on this punt. Gunter special teams all year long had big plays. They had that stretch where they had, I think it was 4 games in a row, they had a special teams touchdown, whether it was a Jace Martin kick return or a Colin Peacock punt return. They had some huge plays in the punting game, in the kick game. Preston Tarpley was basically automatic, whether it was extra points or field goals. So special teams was big for Gunter all year long. And there's a couple instances in this game where they come up big. This is one of the first ones, because Gunter punts. They're short of midfield. It's a really good punt, down to the Poth 15, and it's a muff. The guy is about to catch it, and Mitchell Gage blasts him as the ball he's about to pull it in. Now Gunter doesn't recover the fumble. If they would have, that would have been huge because it would have been inside, the 10-yard line. But Poth recovers, and they have to start at the 3-yard line, instead of potentially, at their the play happened about the 15. But if he's able to either get off a return or they just get the ball there, that's obviously better than the 3-yard line. And so that's a huge play because now they've got to potentially go the length of the field. And the ensuing drive ends up being the a punt because you're backed up. They tried a first down pass, it was incomplete. They rush a couple times to get away from their end zone. They've got to punt. Well, since they're punting from essentially the end zone, Gunter gets it on at the Pirate 46. They get it in plus territory, and they only need 4 plays to score. Ashton Bennett does it again, 11-yard touchdown, middle of the second quarter. It's 14-0. So that's a huge swing. It takes a little bit to make it happen, but it does. And obviously, Post has a different approach on that drive if they're starting at their 15 instead of their 3. So that indirectly had an effect to give Gunter good field position. Didn't have to go very far. Boom, it's 14-0. The next drive is when Poth gets intercepted. But again, Gunter has it at the 9-yard line. They've got to they're gonna go 91 yards, and they do. They go 91 yards in 12 plays. They get a couple of completions from Overman to Lemberg. The first one was the big one. It was for 19 yards. So Gunter goes from its 9 to the 28, just like that, and that sets things up for later in the drive. Lemberg again catches the 25-yarder once they get past midfield, so that puts him in the red zone. And a couple plays later, Ethan Sloan finishes off that drive right before half, with 55 seconds to go in the half. Gunter goes up 21-0. Now, that's huge because, one, they chewed up enough time that Poth couldn't get really anything before the half. They ran it twice from their 18, and then that was the half. And that was huge because, like we said, the Pirates were getting the ball start second half. So if they didn't have that huge 12-play drive that ate up about 3.5 minutes, there was a chance that Poth could have scored before half, made it 21-7, and they were getting the ball. They'd be getting the ball, maybe cut it to 21-14, however you want to slice it, because they were getting the ball. At worst, like we said, Poth is getting the ball, start second half. They could easily go down and score, make it 21-7. And I think a lot of people, we were talking about how, they haven't done anything, but they hit a couple big plays. What happens if they come out, they make the halftime adjustments, they do what they need to do, come out and put a drive together. They figure out, hey, this works, this didn't work, let's not do this. Sometimes you get a penalty or something, whatever, and next thing you know, it's 21-7. Now we got a ball game again. Well, Poth does get a first down, but then the drive stalls there, and they have to punt. And it's not a good punt, and Gunter starts at its own 44 about 4 minutes into the third quarter. And again, another good drive, a good mix of run and pass, and it ends with Ivy Hellman scoring on a 21-yard run, and now it's 28-0, and we're basically again in the middle of the third quarter and a half left. Gunner's up 28-0, and that one basically everybody said, okay, that's it. There's no way Poth is going to come back in this one to pull that off. And again, the offense was a little bit better in the second half because, and we mentioned at the end, obviously at the very end, they got a huge chunk of their yardage, but Poth ended up with only 243 yards of total offense. And we said they had about a little under 100-ish at halftime. So they were a little better in the second half. But again, they got a first down, but then had to punt. Then again, Gunter gets the ball and scores again. This time, Hellman again does the honors, 11 yards on the run again. And this was one of the ones we talked about, special teams. So it's 28-0. Poth is at their 47. It's 4th and 4. They line up to punt. They fake the punt. Trey Walton sniffs it out, makes a stop for no gain at the line of scrimmage. So Gunter takes over at the 47. They've only got to go 47 yards, and that really did it because obviously, if Poth can pick that up, they'd be in Gunter territory, maybe have a chance, an outside chance to make something happen. But again, special teams comes up, makes a play, isn't fooled on the fake punt, and Gunter only needs, again, 4 more plays, from midfield. It did take there was a pass interference on the drive that did help. But again, quick, boom, boom, boom. All of a sudden, Gunter's in the end zone with Hellman on that 11-yard touchdown, and it's 35-0 with a minute and a half left in the third quarter. And again, that was basically it. We got to the fourth quarter. They put in some backups. Kane Bolt was able to put the cherry on top of this one. He had a 14-yard touchdown run with 2:27 left. And then, like we said, after that, Poth got the ball back and was able to get their touchdown. And then that was with the 16 seconds left. Kickoff, Gunter kneels down, end of game celebration, the whole deal. And so on that final drive, let's see, I'm going to make sure I get my yardage on that drive. So there was 7, 10, 47, 60. So 67 yards came on that last drive out of the 243. 67 of it came on the last drive, which obviously was by far their best drive of the game. And so that was it. And then we have the celebration. Ashton Bennett is offensive MVP. Colin Peacock is the defensive MVP, and it was never much in doubt that Gunter was the best team in 3A Division II based on this matchup in front of a little over 9,000 people in this game. And it was I hate to say it was the perfect way to end a perfect season. It was like we said, domination in all three phases. Ivy Hellman had an interception in the second half, so your Gunter, you forced 2 turnovers. If you want to count the turnover on downs as sniffing out the fake punt as a turnover, feel free to do that. Like we said, it was very fitting that you could look at this whole game and say all these things that added up along the way were the reason that Gunter was the best team and won another state championship. So again, a great way to cap off the football season in 2022. I know Whitesboro, had to be watching what Brock did in beating Malakoff to get to the championship game, and then playing Franklin basically to a stalemate until the last second for a field goal, and say that could have been us. Collinsville losing to Albany in the region final, to watch Albany go and destroy both of their next opponents, both in the semifinals and in their championship game. Collinsville had to say, man, that could have been us. But again, that says a lot about. I think Bell's, of course, having to deal with Holiday again. I think they would have loved to have had a second shot at Gunter, as close as that game was the first time, only being 10 points. Maybe, if they would have somehow found a way to got past Holiday, are we talking about Bells right now to be able to, if you can beat Gunter, and then if you could beat Gunter, you could certainly have a shot to beat Canadian. And I think if Bells would have gotten to this point, I think they could have beaten this Poth team as well. So there was a lot of great football in Texoma this year. Obviously with what Pottsboro did, with what Tioga did, winning the district championship and improving their year, what Howe was able to do under new management over there with the coaching change, to go from back-to-back for seasons and then to get into the playoffs, win as many games as they did compared to the last 3 or 4 years combined. And like we said, they scored more points on Gunter than anybody, to show how much they've improved. There's just a lot of good things, in a lot of areas for the football around here. And it is always interesting in the first year of a realignment. What does that mean? Because it's so hard to tell. I know we just worry about what we do here in Texoma, which of course makes sense. But even on like a statewide level, the Dave Campbell's people put out something on Sunday, following all the championship games about where people were ranked in the preseason, and I think they had out of the 12 championships, 6 of the 12 were their preseason number ones, including Gunter in that mix. And how they were just kind of saying, everybody that they picked in the preseason, I think every champion was in the top 10, in their top 10 somewhere, whether it was number 1 or number 2 or number 5 or whatever. And that stuff's really hard in a realignment year because you just don't know, when this team comes over from this region, or this team moves out of this district, or this team moves up to this either classification or division, how does that change the whole bracket? And you're trying to do that, 6 months in advance, trying to figure that stuff out. And so the first year of realignment is always interesting to see how teams fare, because we're going to be seeing all these matchups again next year in the regular season and in district. And, now what the bracket's going to look like. Like, oh, if you finish here, this is where you might see Gunter in the bracket, because Gunter's probably going to win their district. Or, oh, now we need so-and-so to beat so-and-so to get them on the other side of the bracket, or hey, these are the best teams in this region who we might play if we get that far, that sort of thing. So it's always interesting to see how things shake out the first year of a realignment year. Obviously, graduation plays a big factor. It's gonna play. It always plays a big factor for every team, because there's always a good chunk of there's usually always a good chunk of seniors, that are contributors or key contributors to every program. And that's going to affect what things look out. But obviously, if you're looking at what's in store for next year, I mean, if we just go down the list, Sherman showed its flashes. It beat people that beat somebody that made the playoffs. But it lost to people behind them in the standings, or tied with them in the standings. They were 2 games. They were 2 games away from being tied for 3rd place, so they're not that far away. And we saw, you can look at their scores as a whole, as a 4-6 team, that if 4 or 5 plays go their way, instead of 4-6, they might be 7-3. They definitely would have had a winning record. And so it's just one of those deals where they kind of showed they were right there. They were able to scare some people. They were able to make some people nervous after beating them about potentially making the playoffs. And so if Sherman can take that next step to move up just a little bit, then like I said, they may not get in, and it may come down to a tiebreaker. But they were right there to put themselves in position for that, and they ended up coming short. Now for Denison again, they were in that sort of same boat. They were literally 1 game away from making the playoffs. If they would have beaten Terrell, they would have gotten in and over the Tigers for the last seed. But we also saw how tough that district was, with Melissa going as far as they did before losing to the eventual defending champion who defended their title in South Oak Cliff. We saw all 4 of the teams get past the first round. So we saw how deep this district was. So finishing 5th in this district is not bad, but you were that close to potentially having that be you. And so after making it the last couple of years, Denison was unable to get in this year. But again, they're not that far away. They are going to have some key holes to fill, much like Sherman is. But they had a lot of young guys on both sides of the ball playing key roles that will be back. And if you find the right fits at a couple spots, again, you know the teams that you have to beat. You know the teams that you can beat, the teams that you beat this year. And you know the roadmap to get in. And Denison's probably a little closer than Sherman is, because literally all you have to do is flip one result. But again, it's about finding a way to move up into that top 4 in what is probably going to be another really good group. Now, a lot of those teams have, like we said, some people, a team like Crandall or a team like Terrell, the teams that are right in front of you, they had some key seniors. But this is also a Denison team that Melissa went as far as they did, and you only lost to them by 10 at their place. So it shows you're not as far off as you might think you are by finishing outside the playoff berth. Van Alstyne, kind of, obviously an improvement in their overall record, finishing second in the district, getting to the second round again. Unfortunately for them, they played Carthage, who we talked about earlier was one of the teams that is on a better roll than Gunter, and they unfortunately had to play them in the second round, and Carthage went and just steamrolled everybody on the way to winning yet another state championship. So if you're Van Alstyne, you have to try to get into that top spot. Two in the second place team and the third place seed don't help you if you'd like to avoid Carthage, who you assume is going to win their district. So you've got to find a way. You've beaten everybody else in that district. Can you find a way to beat Aubrey and potentially get a district title and the top seed out of that district? But again, that was this is the continuation of Van Alstyne being in 4A. This was year 3. The last 2 years, they've made the playoffs. They've done better in district each time. And so they're in a good spot being able to compete at this level. But they know what the bracket's going to look like and what they need to not look like with Carthage as a potential roadblock for them in the second round. We've talked about Whitesboro, obviously. Another great year for them, getting as far as they did. Losing to Brock. Their only 2 losses are to Brock. Again, there's no shame in saying we set all these school records, wins. We got back to the region final, a place that we hadn't been to before the last 2 years. We get there 2 years in a row, and unfortunately Brock is the team that has stymied us the last 2 years, and they've gone on to be the runner-up both of those 2 years. Again, the biggest thing with Whitesboro, we talked about it going into the season, they had some key losses. How are they going to be able to handle it? It's going to be the same thing this year. You're going to have a new last year you had your quarterback coming back. You had a running back coming back that was coming off an injury, but you knew what he could do before he got hurt. But those guys are going to be gone because they're graduating. There's guys on defense that are going to be graduating. Can the newcomers, a lot of who will be seniors have been starters, as sophomores and juniors on these 2 teams, but can they be the leaders and continue this? And again, if you do what you've been doing, Brock is lurking. You were better against Brock. Can you still be on that level to compete with one of the best programs and continue to be among one of the best in 3A Division I, potentially getting to the Final 8 3 years in a row? It's going to be a challenge, but they're not going to back away from that challenge. And again, they're in a really good district. So again, big expectations again for Whitesboro for as much as they did, and the fact that Brock was basically the only team to be able to stop them. They're going to have a target on their back once again, and can they handle it? Same thing with Pottsboro. Pottsboro was made the big jump record-wise. They were in the mix for the district title the last couple of years, but their overall record was not as good compared to what they did this year. But they go 9-1 in the regular season, go undefeated in this district. Targets on their back. They've got Major McBride back for one more year. He's obviously going to be the focal point again. Everybody knows it. I think the big thing with talking with Coach Poe before this year was how big of a year was he going to have, because his sophomore year was pretty good, and then it went to a whole new level this year. And so everybody knows they have to deal with 5 for sure next year, but they've got to live up to that pressure of, we're the defending champion. We beat everybody last year. As soon as somebody beats us, that changes the potential math of these district standings. But again, Pottsboro's been one of those teams that they always seem to reload. They're always in the mix, even if their overall record didn't show it because they played a tough non-district schedule. they've been in a battle in this district till the last week, fighting for the top seed, the second seed, co-district champions, whatever it may be. And I think a lot of people expect that out of Pottsboro again. Down into 3A Division 2, SNS moved over to a new district, struggled, had a new coach, had some new faces, working on things, went 1-9, had a couple other games that were somewhat close, but obviously, there's some things to work on in there. And we talked about in this district, you only have to win 2 games to get in. That's what Henrietta did. They beat Valley View and SNS. So if you're SNS, at minimum, you look at your roadmap saying, if we can beat Henrietta and Valley View, we can get the 4th spot. And if they're able to make a second-year leap under that coaching staff with some of the young guys that they had, then maybe they can be in that mix the last couple weeks to be a threat to at least get into the playoffs. Over in 3A Division 2, we've obviously talked about Gunter. They're going to be the favorite, probably, preseason D1. They'll probably stay that way until they lose multiple times, assuming they, if they lose the Brock game, I don't think that, not that rankings matter, but they'll be a favorite to repeat. And I will point out, as we talked about their run, that's the one thing they have not done. They've basically done everything during this run except repeat. Obviously the first championship, they went back and lost to Newton. The 19 championship, they made it to the semifinals against Canadian, lost that one. Canadian, obviously that was Canadian's best team during this run because they went and won the whole thing. And I think if Gunter would have won that game, they would have gone back to back. But Canadian was really good, and that game wasn't even close in that semifinal. But that's the one thing Gunter hasn't done is gone back to back. So they've got a chance to do that, and that's obviously it'd be nice to see them be able to do that. And you don't care when you win them, but that's the only thing they haven't done. Bells, as the district runner-up, since this district has taken place, we've talked about the only team in this district to beat Gunter is Bells. The only team to beat Bells is Gunter. But this was the closest matchup between the two, the 10-point game. But again, Bells has a lot of senior guys that they relied on this year to do what they did, get back to the region semifinals for the 3rd time in 4 years. And their big thing, and I know it's already probably been talked about in off-season stuff and getting ready, looking ahead to next year, they're trying to get to the region final. They've never done it. They're trying to break through that wall. Holiday has been that sticking point, and they know if they get second place again, as long as Holiday wins that district over there, if they get to the region finals, Holiday's probably going to be there. Although Holiday's coach did retire, so who knows what that's going to look like. But obviously you have to assume if you're Bells, Holiday is waiting in the region semifinals. But again, we're at this point with Bells now. They're on this run. They've been in the playoffs, 9 years in a row since Coach West has been there. These last 3 years, they've won at least 9 games every year. And so they're sort of in a reload situation. They've got that pipeline, filling in the cracks, filling in the openings in the starting lineup to where, okay, so this is what we do. Go win 9-10 games, make the second, third round of the playoffs, and see what happens. So I think a lot of that is what you could sort of expect out of Bells. Obviously, with Howe as the 3rd local team in that district, what do they have as an encore now that they've got some winning experience and success under their belt? You had a bunch of kids that hadn't had any success whatsoever, and you go 6-5. You go 2-3 in district. You make the playoffs. You're gonna have turnover. You're gonna have a new quarterback because Austin Haley graduates after starting for 4 years. You're gonna have some openings at some other spots. But you've got a lot of guys who are, the juniors in this group that got that taste, and can they find a way to maybe move up from the 4 spot to the 3 spot? They lost that on a tiebreaker, with Blue Ridge. Can you find a way to get to third? Can you maybe get to second? Can you find a way to beat Bells? But obviously the biggest thing is going to see how continue this growth to go from 0-10 to 6-5, make the playoffs. Can you keep that momentum going? Can you find a way to move up in those district standings as tough as that district is? But obviously really good signs from Howe from what we've seen the last couple of years. And as we move down to 2A, in 6-2A Division 1, Tioga's kind of in that boat from the standpoint of Tioga made that leap after last year to go from, hey, we're 1-9, 2-8, make the playoffs, to jump up to get to 500, have a chance to win a playoff game, but really have some success in jumping up. And then they took that next step in terms of they won the district championship. They went undefeated in district. They went 8-2 in the regular season, but they lost to a 4 seed in the first round. So obviously the focus on Tioga is, okay, we know you can do all the stuff in the regular season. Now it's when it gets to winning time, can it gets to playoff time, can you have success? And I would assume that they're probably going to be if they're not a favorite. If they're not the favorite, they're one of the favorites in this district. They won it by 2 games. They went 5-0, and Albert and Nakona both went 3-2. So it's not like it was a semi-close sort of deal to get the top seed. And Tioga's got a ton of guys coming back. I assume Hayden Hilliard, who was supposed to be their quarterback, is going to be on track for his senior year to return after an injury before the season wiped that out. So they've still got, they basically brought back everybody from last year's team. There are definitely going to be some holes to fill, but there are, a lot of key guys will still be back. And Tioga's biggest thing is can we make that jump to playoff success? We've had regular season success. We've won a district championship. Can we get playoff wins? Can we go a couple rounds and make some noise in the bracket? Whitewright dealt with some injuries. Still found a way to get into the playoffs in that district as the 4 seed by winning a tiebreaker. They went 4-6, lost their first round playoff game to go 4-7. So the question obviously with them is, can they stay healthy, and can they make a move, winning record and win in the playoffs? They've made the playoffs a couple times recently, but they've lost in the first round as a lower seed. Can they work their way up? Obviously they're 2-3. One more win ties them for second place, and then who knows what tiebreakers potentially could have done. They almost beat Tioga in the last game of the season, which really could have played some havoc in the standings and seeding. They lost in overtime that last week. So they're not that far away. But at the very least, they've seen their floor as, hey, being a playoff team after dropping down from 3A. So that's kind of the next step for Whitewright. And then last but certainly not least, because of the great season they had, we touched on it at the beginning, down in 8-2A Division 2 with Collinsville, again, to go from where they were at 4-6 and missing the playoffs last year in 2A Division 1, dropping down. I think everybody said, well, we're definitely a playoff team, but to do what they did, to get on the roll that they got on, to go undefeated in this district that has Munster, that had a state-ranked team in Santo, who nobody really knew anything about because they're so far to the west. They were the newcomer to a lot of these teams because if these teams weren't in a district together, a lot of them had played each other in non-district, so you knew what you were getting. But for Collinsville to go 9-1 in the regular season, go all the way to the region final, set the record, the school record for wins, lose to the eventual champion, and again do it with a group that there's going to be so many of these guys back at a lot of key positions. They will be a focal point going forward because it's going to be really hard for them to slide under the radar like they did this year. Like I said, I think a lot of people thought, oh, they're definitely a playoff team, but how good are they? And they're not going to be able to sneak up on anybody next year for sure. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to expect another deep run with what's with a talented junior class that's going to be going for one last ride to make even more history next year. So a lot of good storylines to look for 8 months from now when we kick off another season for sure. But sadly, amazingly, this season has come to an end. It's always fun to see what happens, and it's always fun to see what's in store for all our teams, because it's been really good football, and obviously going to prove that by winning yet another state championship. And it's just a great time for football around here, with the runs that some of our teams have had, up and down the classification. So I thank you again for listening all season long. It's always fun to do this every week and talk about how things have gone and where things are going and who's playing well and what the great games that we've had, starting all the way back with the Battle of the Axe and the crazy comeback by Denison in week 1 to talk about a team winning a state championship in the final week of the season. So we're done with the podcast for another year. Again, thank you for listening. But that doesn't mean we're done with sports. Obviously, we've got basketball in full swing. A lot of people are starting district play. Softball and baseball will be right around the corner. Soccer kicks off next month, and then we start talking about all the other sports like track and tennis and golf, where we always seem to have people competing for championships, whether it's on a team level or an individual level in those sports as well. So follow along, heralddemocrat.com. You find all information there. Follow me on Twitter at Jason De La Rosa. All sorts of posts and info and stats and all the stuff you need to follow there. And since it is Christmas week, we're entering the holiday season. Have a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, whatever you got going on, both this week and next week over the break, heading into New Year's. Be safe. If you're traveling, I know a lot of people are traveling. Myself, I'll be traveling, taking some time off to go spend it with my family back up in Rhode Island. And I'm sure there's lots of people, whether you're just going to family or you're able to take a vacation because school's out, and the way the calendar falls, it's easy to do this time of year. So be safe in that. Enjoy the time you spend with your family. I hope you'll be recovering from football season like I will, and we'll move on to all the other sports going on in Texoma. So again, thanks for listening in, and we will talk to you next year on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast.